Hola, bienvenidos. Vamos a tener ahora la segunda charla de la mañana. La charla que va a hacer María Evagorou es repensando la práctica científica, la importancia de la argumentación en las ciencias y en la enseñanza de las ciencias. Y nos parecía muy interesante que ella hablara de esto porque nos puede servir para darnos cuenta de algo que también ha comentado José Miguel un poco al principio, que es que cuando, por ejemplo, los científicos hacemos divulgación científica, no solamente estamos enseñando el tema del que estamos hablando. Por ejemplo, si somos geólogos y estamos hablando sobre volcanes, en realidad no estamos enseñando solo sobre volcanes. Estamos enseñando también una manera de pensar y una manera de hacer, la lógica del experto, la manera en la que se hacen las ciencias. De esto ha hablado un poco Sara y va a continuar hablando María. María Evagorou es profesora de didáctica de las ciencias, de enseñanza de las ciencias en la Universidad de Nicosia, en Chipre. Su formación ha sido en Inglaterra, con una de las personas más importantes del ámbito de la enseñanza de las ciencias, que es Jonathan Osborne. Su investigación se centra en explorar y en intentar promover las capacidades argumentativas de los estudiantes y, en ese sentido, el sistema de pensamiento de los estudiantes. Entonces, utilizar las ciencias para mejorar estas capacidades. Ha publicado muchísimos journals. Yo quería destacar que ha recibido en el 2004 el premio al mejor journal en enseñanza de las ciencias. Y bueno, es un placer tenerla aquí. Yo la conozco personalmente de mi trabajo, entonces me parece especialmente interesante haber coincidido. Cuando ella acabe, subimos a la mesa Sara como la ponente anterior, José Miguel como presidente de ENCIENDE y Pepe como representante de COSCE, y hacemos una ronda de preguntas y comentarios con vosotros. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. So let me get this working. I would like to thank you for inviting me to be part of this symposium here. And I'm really glad because this is the first time that I will be talking about my work to scientists and not science educators. And it was a challenge for me to try and rethink what I do and what we do in the classroom as science educators from this perspective. So I want to start by saying that I am a science educator and not a scientist, and it will be really interesting for me to hear your perspective of my talk and your comments later on. So today I will be talking about rethinking scientific practices, the importance of argumentation. And I will start with a very basic question. What is science? Science is obviously a set of knowledge claims and explanations about the natural world. But at the same time, it is a set of systematic processes, for example, predictions, theory testing, experimentation, observation, and all the scientific methods that Sarah talked before in her presentation. So one could say that science is a set of processes, and those processes lead to knowledge. And from that knowledge, we have a set of products. We have technology, for example. We have computers, and so on. So why is science important? For many reasons. For example, I couldn't consider my life, how my life would be without electricity. And I've been there, so it's not good. Consider the kind of changes that happen in our lives because of the discovery of DNA, or because of medicines, vaccines, or because of all the other kind of processes that take place that have helped us to improve our lives, as for example, extracting natural gas. So based on the definition of science that I have just presented, one could say that what you see right here on this slide is a representation of science. So we have the real world, the scientists go outside, they observe, they experiment, they collect data, they do whatever they do. And from this simple process, they come up with a theory. So we have the processes and we have the knowledge as well. So let me try to map this model on an example from science. And I'm going to use the example of the discovery of the structure of DNA. So during the discovery of DNA, Watson and Crick They were both scientists at the University of Cambridge at the Cavendish Lab. And in the 1950s, specifically in 1951, they started working on this problem. So they went outside to the real world. They had this problem of what is the structure of the DNA. In their case, they didn't do any observations or any experimentations because they collected data from other scientists. And the kind of data they collected were knowledge about chemistry and about structure of chemistry, and also this particular image of DNA that was taken by Rosalind Franklin at King's College. And based on that observation and experimentation, they discovered the structure of DNA, and the picture you see here is a picture of Watson and Crick with their model of the structure of the DNA. But my question now is science that simple? Is the process of doing science and coming to scientific knowledge or constructing a theory that simple? Is it that straightforward? Is what I just presented an accurate representation of science? Well, the answer is probably not, but this is what you would find in the science, in school science and in science textbooks. So I'm going to go back to the story of the structure of DNA, and I'm going to add some information in that story and see what a true representation of doing science would mean based on that story. So DNA was first isolated in the 1969 by Friedrich Mischer, and then in the late 40s we knew a lot about what it contained, that it contained phosphate, sugar, for nitrogen containing chemical bases, and so on. In 1951, when Watson and Crick started doing work on the structure of DNA at King's College, at the same time we had at least 2 different groups working on the same problem in different institutions. So we had a group at King's College London, and that was Maurice Wilkins and Rosalind Franklin. And Rosalind was a woman, which was very important for the time. She was one of the first women that started doing science. And we had Linus Pauling as well at California Technological Institute in the US. And these 2 different groups were working on the same problem from 2 different perspectives. For example, Linus Pauling was a chemist, and he was the first that discovered a single-stranded alpha helix form that is found in some proteins. And his ideas prompted biologists to start thinking about helix forms in biology. Additionally, he was one of the first people that started building 3-dimensional models in chemistry. So he prompted other scientists to start building physical 3-dimensional models in order to be able to understand the phenomena that happen. On the other hand, Wilkins and Franklin at King's College were trying to find actual physical evidence, and what they were doing, they were taking pictures, X-ray images of DNA to start understanding the structure of the DNA. So we have 2 different groups working on the same problem, and then at the same time we have Watson and Crick, who were not collecting evidence themselves, they were not experimenting, but they were using evidence that were collected by other groups. So Watson and Crick were going to conferences, talking to other scientists and trying to understand what they were doing in order to put together a model of the structure of the DNA. In 1953, Linus Pauling presented a model of the structure of DNA, and after a while, that proved to be wrong. After Linus Pauling, Watson and Crick presented their own 3-dimensional model of the structure of DNA, and their model was based on Pauling's previous work and on the picture that they obtained from the group at King's College London. And their model proved to be right, and it won them the Nobel Prize in 1961. So based on the story that I just told you, the story of a case study of doing science, we could see that doing science is more complicated than going outside, observing, collecting data, and coming to a theory. Doing science contains looking at the real world, making models. Maybe those models don't work, as we saw from the story before. So we need to go back, collect more data, see if our predictions agree with what has been done, change the process, and go all over it again. And this model of science is a model by a historian and philosopher of science, Geary. So the complex model of science applies to various examples of scientific discoveries, probably not to all discoveries of scientific discoveries, but most of them. Another example could be the explanation of day and night. So why do we have day and night? If we go back to the history of humanity, probably one of the first explanations that was provided was that we have day and night because the sun, who is a god, decides to go and rest during the night and then comes up during the day. Then in ancient Greek, Aristotle was saying that the Earth is in the center of our system and the sun moves around it. So we had the Earth-centered system. And this kind of theory can explain our observations. If we use that theory, we can still explain why we have day and night. But then, while we had new technology and new ways of observing the planets and the star systems, we came up with the explanation that the Earth, the sun is in the center of our system, and the Earth rotates around its axis. So we see again from this example that theories, knowledge changes, and it changes based on the new kind of tools that we have to gain information, to gain evidence, and it's not always easy to come up with a theory. And what's important in this whole understanding of science is the processes that take place before we have the knowledge. I just wanted to share this picture with you because I like this picture for two different reasons. First, because it's a really nice picture, and I'm into photography. And secondly, because that's one of the two evidence that we have that the Earth spins. What you see here is a picture that was taken pointing at the North Pole. And you have a camera standing on a tripod and pointing at the night sky. And the shutter of the camera was left open. So you see the traces of the stars on the night sky. And we have two different ways of explaining the traces of the stars. We could either say that we have a star in the middle, which is not moving, and all the other stars are moving around that one, and that's why we have the circles. Or the other explanation is that the camera that was on the Earth was moving, and the sky was not moving. So this is one of the two kind of evidence that we have showing that the Earth spins. And the other one is Foucault's pendulum, but I'm not going to talk about it today. So why did I present this model of science? Because I wanted to emphasize the complexities of science, and that science is not only about the knowledge production, but it's also about the different kind of processes that take place. And that's what Sarah talked before, and that's what I'm going to emphasize in my talk today. And we have different kind of processes, and as scientists, you know those processes are much better than I do. So we have hypothesizing, asking questions, collecting data, building models to test our theories, designing experiments to test theories, reasoning, thinking, explaining what we do and our findings either to other scientists and other groups or to the public to convince them, defending or justifying our findings to convince other people of our work, obtaining, evaluating, and communicating information. And of course, other important aspects and processes of science are the authenticity, because what scientists are doing in their labs is authentic. They have a question that they need to find the answer. And also uncertainty, because when they start working with a problem, they don't know the answer, but they're looking for the answer. So all these kind of processes in science education, we call them scientific practices. That is what the scientists are doing in their labs, in their work. And now what's the problem? The problem is that in school science, we present knowledge, but we don't really present the scientific practices. So our students are not really familiar with what's actually happening, the real processes, the real scientific practices. So what we want to change as science educators is we want science in the classroom to better resemble scientific practice. And we want students to become active learners and acquire scientific knowledge in meaningful context. And we have been trying in different ways to bring these changes in the science classrooms for decades. But unfortunately, change is not easy to happen, and I'm going to talk about it later on. So what kind of problems do we have in the science classroom as science educators these days? The number of students that are deciding to follow science careers is decreasing. So we have less and less students wanting to become scientists. And we had a report recently, a European report called Europe Needs More Scientists. And I think this is true, especially in these critical times that we now have in Europe. And maybe we should try to think and follow the example of the US, because during the Cold War in the US, they identified that to help them improve their financial situation, they had to improve science. So they invested money and time in improving science education. So we have less students choosing to become scientists. We have negative attitudes towards science. Our students don't like science. But at the same time, we want to promote science for all, which is we don't want people to have positive image towards science and becoming scientists, but we also want them to understand the importance of doing science in their everyday lives and how this is going to help them. So in order to change all the negative situation around science education, we want to introduce scientific practices in science education. We want students to know and experience the scientific practices. So the title of my talk was Rethinking Scientific Practices in Science Education, but while I was preparing the talk, I thought that maybe placing scientific practices in science education is more correct, because we haven't really put an emphasis on that. So we have a lot of work being done around this area, and we have reports in the US and in Europe around this. And these are two different kind of reports. The first one, a framework for K-12 science education, is a US report, and this is a framework that was prepared both by science educators and scientists, and describes what kind of things we should be doing in the science classroom in order to be able to change science education. This report is available free online, so if you search for it, you can find the full report. This report says that we have 3 dimensions. They have 3 dimensions in the framework, which they consider as important in science education. You will see that the first dimension is scientific and engineering practices, and those are the kind of practices that I talked about before. The second dimension are cross-cutting concepts, as for example, the patterns, systems, building models. And the third dimension is the core ideas, the content, the concepts. The second report is a European report. Both are quite, they're recent, 2012, both of them. So the second report, Science Education in Europe, is basically a description of the kind of issues, the kind of problems that we face in Europe around science education, and it talks about the different countries and how we succeed or not in science education. And it also describes the changes that are happening in European countries. Unfortunately, you will see in the report that most of the European countries do not do that well in international studies, as for example, PISA or TIMSS. But the positive outcome of the report is that in all European countries, we have efforts to change the practices and change the curriculums. And all countries have been in the process of changing their curriculums and incorporating scientific practices or competences. And I know that in Spain as well, argumentation is one of the competences that is considered important and has been added in the curriculum. So argumentation was one of the words that I used in my title. But what is argumentation? Argumentation is a scientific practice, and it's one of the scientific practices under emphasis in the two reports that I just talked about. And it has been the emphasis of many studies in science education during the last decades, probably during the last 2 decades. Trying to define argumentation. Argumentation is viewed as verbal, either written or oral and social activity aiming at justifying or defending a standpoint for an audience, and is used as a process of social construction of knowledge in which people collectively discuss, decide on the construction of shared knowledge. Trying to place argumentation in the scientific practices that I presented before. Argumentation is the process of collecting data, is the process of thinking about those data, is the process of explaining your data either to your research group or to the public, is the process of defending and justifying, is the process of evaluating and communicating the information. So argumentation incorporates a lot of those scientific practices that I talked about. I also wanted to add that argumentation is not a skill. It's also a skill, but it's not a skill that is only specific to science. It's a skill that can help students in other aspects of their lives. Before, if they obtain this skill of argumentation, they will be able to defend their viewpoints in other aspects of their lives. So why argumentation in science education? Well, it's a core scientific practice. It's what scientists are doing while they're doing their work. Maybe they don't call it that, but that's what they're doing. They are routinely engaged in arguments about which they have to collect data, present their data, interpret their meaning. From a cognitive perspective, argumentation requires students to coordinate evidence with a claim, and in that way, argumentation helps them to understand the content. It can also provide the structure for the students to develop the necessary communication skills and discourse skills that will enable them to advance their scientific knowledge. And in the recent frameworks in the US and in Europe, it has been identified as very important because, as I said earlier, it can also help them understand and interpret media reports and understand studies that are presented to them. So summarizing, argumentation can engage students in scientific practices. It supports the understanding of content of science, and it can support a connection between science and everyday life, since this is a thinking skill. So by doing argumentation as part of school science, we can achieve all the purposes of science education. Just some detail, a bit of a detail here. Argumentation can be internal and it can be external as well. Internal in terms of that, as a person, without discussing my ideas with anyone else, I could get in the process of thinking about my data, thinking how my data fit my hypothesis or not, and develop my theory without discussing that with anyone else. But at the same time, it can be external because I can do this same process with other people. So I've talked about scientific practices, about argumentation in a theoretical kind of way. Now I'm going to present some examples from my work to show you how I try to incorporate argumentation in the actual teaching of science. As you will see on the presentation of my work, I have a socio-scientific approach, so I consider the social aspects of doing science as well in my work. The first example is part of a project that I did in the UK while I was doing my PhD there. And in this project, the purpose of this project was to engage students in argumentation. So the context. When we decided to do this project on argumentation, there was a real problem. There was an actual problem in the UK. They have two different kinds of squirrels in the UK, and you can see the pictures here. They have the gray, and they have the red one as well. The red squirrel is an indigenous species. It's an original species from the UK. The gray one is an introduced species, and it was introduced from North America by the Queen in the late 1980s. The difference between these two kinds of squirrels is that the gray one is stronger. It carries a disease which is called squirrel pox, but that disease does not kill it. But if the red one gets that disease, then it dies. And the other difference is that the gray can eat acorn even if it's not ripe, and they can eat other kind of foods as well. They can eat rubbish from houses, but the red cannot. So they have to fight over food, and we have the disease issue as well. So what was the problem? Back then, when I was doing this study, the government, the UK government, decided that they should kill the gray squirrels in order to keep the number of the red high, because the population of the red was dropping. So the problem that we posed to the students was, do you agree with the government's decision to kill the gray squirrel in order to save the red squirrel? And that was a group of 14 to 15-year-old students, secondary school students in the UK. In order to facilitate the discussion, because we wanted students to talk to each other, we wanted them to find data to support their arguments based on their data and be able to answer back to the other groups. We used an online system, a platform, and in that platform we had tools to help them engage in the discussion. And we had two different kind of tools. We call them scaffolding because they can assist students in their discussions. One of the tools was a pop-up window with questions. So we had questions that we wanted the students to start thinking about. And also we had the second tool in which they had their claims. One claim was that we agree with the government's decision, and the other claim was that we do not agree with the government's decision. And while they were going through their data, through their evidence, they could type down the evidence and put it under the appropriate claim. So by the end of the instruction, by the end of the lessons, they would know if they have more data for one claim or more data for the other claim. What was interesting was that we started with two claims, either agree or disagree, but most of the students came up with a third claim saying that we agree given that we will do this and this and this. So we designed 4 different activities. You can see the structure of the activities here. There was 4 different lessons, 80 minutes for each lesson. And the kind of data that we provided to the students were information from different trusts that were doing work with squirrel, and we put everything within that system. So we had all the information, all the data in the system. We had interviews of people talking about their work with the squirrels in that system. So here, for example, you can see a map showing how the population changed in different times. So the red is the population of the red, and the gray is the population of the gray. We implemented this project and we collected data to see what happens. And we had the students work in pairs, and we had them work in pairs because they were working in front of a computer. So it was easier to have 2 people work in front of a computer rather than 4 or 5. So we collected data, case studies. So we had data from all the classroom, but particularly I studied the data from 2 pairs, a high ability pair and a low ability pair. And what we found out was that one of the pairs engaged in argumentation. They engaged in the process of collecting data, talking about their data and so on, but the other one did not engage in argumentation that much. And how did that process of engaging in argumentation actually look for those students? The first part of the graph is the first pair, and the second part of the graph is the second pair. And as you can see, for the first pair, we had the students negotiating a shared understanding of their data. So if they saw a data about the red squirrel, they would talk about it, try to explain it to each other. They talked a lot about the maps, trying to understand the map, about the disease, about the different kind of foods that they were eating. But they were talking to each other about this. They were asking each other a lot of questions, trying to understand their data. And they also talked a lot about the structure of their argument, how to present their argument to their class, because they had to present their argument to their class. Now looking at the second pair, they were reading the data most of the time. They did not really engage in argumentation. So what was interesting at the end of the instruction, however, was that the pair which engaged in argumentation had better learning outcomes. They improved in terms of their learning. And they also obviously improved in terms of how they construct arguments. So if I was going to do this kind of project again, I would probably invite scientists to discuss the problem with the students, to experience and talk what's actually happening in the classroom, or have the students visit the sites where we have red squirrels and talk to the scientists, or talk to the people in the area about their possible concerns. So that was the first project that I did in argumentation, and I have identified a list of shortcomings. The second example is also along similar lines, but it involves more people and doing more things at the same time. The second example is about decision-making and argumentation as well. And this project was done with elementary school students, with younger students. They were 10 to 12-year-olds. And again, they had to discuss and decide about a problem in their area. And the problem was that they had an excessive amount of mosquitoes in their area because they have a salt lake, and during the winter it rains a lot, and a lot of mosquitoes stay there, creating problems. So this was with elementary school students working on an authentic problem. It was a problem at their community, and they didn't have any previous experience with argumentation. For this project, we had, if I'm not mistaken, 14 lessons. They were 40 minutes each. We spent a lot of time in the classroom, and it was the teacher and two of the researchers at the same time. So during the first lesson, we introduced the problem. The students talk about their experiences with this problem, and they proposed their own solutions. They said what they would do. Then the second lesson, we discussed the proposed solution, and we tried to think about the kind of decisions. And the teacher introduced some other decisions, some other ways to solve the problem. And these ways included chemical spraying, and chemical spray can kill all mosquitoes. Biological spraying that can kill the larvae, introducing new species. For example, there's a kind of fish that is called mosquito fish and can eat the mosquitoes, but one of the problems is that that fish cannot live in the salt lake. And introducing genetic modification of mosquitoes. So they had all these different kind of solutions, and they had to try to understand the science behind these solutions and also the impact of the solutions on the system. After doing the theoretical part of the lesson, we visited the salt lake, and during the visit at the salt lake, the students collected different kind of information. They drew a model of the lake, what was there. They collected data about the temperature of the water. They collected data about the pollution of the area. They tried to see whether there were any houses around the area, what kind of pollution was possibly there, and so on. And we went back to the classroom. And there in the classroom, we asked them to design three-dimensional models of the system of the salt lake, because the salt lake is an environmental system. So they made their own decisions about how to design their models. Here you can see two different examples of their models. You can see in plaster the salt lake. You can see some of the organisms there. They placed frogs because they found frogs there. They placed some birds because they found some birds. What they found out when we visited the lake is that we have shrimp in the lake there, and they didn't know that, so they put the shrimp in their models as well. And after designing their models, we asked them to try to apply their solution on their model. And the decision to do that is because they wouldn't be able to understand the impact of their decisions if they didn't apply their decision. So for example, if a group decided to apply chemical spraying, that would be great because chemical spraying can kill all mosquitoes, but at the same time can have an impact on the birds. So by having the three-dimensional model, they could also start thinking about the kind of impact that would have on the other organisms and on the system in general. So we spent a lot of time trying to apply their solution on their model and explaining their decision for their solution to their groups. And they had to come up with an argument about their decision and present the argument to the class. By the end of that process, they decided that they couldn't decide upon one solution. So maybe a couple of groups had the same solution, but they could not have one solution for the whole classroom. And they were not very, they didn't accept that to begin with. But then they decided that if we can justify that this is what we want to do, then we will move on with this one. And during the last lesson, we invited someone from the council to come to the school. And the students presented what they did in their work to the person from the council, and they talked to the person, and they asked questions about the processes that take place in the council and what the council is thinking of doing about the problem. So they didn't have an interaction with a scientist, but they had an interaction with someone that deals with these kind of problems. Here you can just see two pictures, one from the visit to the Salt Lake and the other from the visit from the person from the council. So what were our findings from this project? We had improved learning outcomes about the ecology of the areas. The students started to understand the area as a system. They could understand the interactions between the organisms of the system. They had an understanding of what is there in the system that they didn't have before. So we had improved knowledge. We had positive attitudes towards science and positive emotions about learning. And we also had ownership of the learning because they did what they did on their own, so they liked what they did. One of the aspects, one of the things that we wanted to investigate in that project was emotions, students' emotions, and their engagement. So other than seeing whether they could improve in terms of argumentation, we also wanted to see their emotions. So we asked them about their emotions. And some of the things they said were, I really like the fact that we tried all together to find the best solution, and we worked in groups. I like that we went to the lake and experienced the real phenomenon. I like that the local councillor listened to our solutions and what we had to say. She might not be able to do something about the problem herself, but at least she listened to what we did. It was not a lesson from a book. It was great that we studied the theme in depth. We discussed many details for each organism. I like the fact that we were free to find our own solution. So you see, from the perspective of the students, they like what they're doing because they're doing something that is meaningful for them, something that they have ownership for. And at the same time, from my perspective as a science educator, they're doing something that resembles the complexities of doing science. They go through the process of going into the real world, going into the salt lake, making a model of the salt lake, trying to make predictions about their solutions, collecting different kind of data, either from the salt lake or trying to find data from the internet if we didn't have access in a different way. So understanding the complexities of science. So the benefits of argumentation in this way is that it engages the students in the scientific practices, and it helps them appreciate the complexities of the field. It introduces the uncertainty and decision-making. And as I've said, the students were not really comfortable with not having one solution. And that is one of the things that they discussed at the end, that we're not sure because we thought that we should have one solution. We couldn't come up with one solution because each one of the solutions has different kind of implications. But this is what prepares students for real life, because in their real life they have a number of different solutions and they have to choose the one that is best for them. And it's not only one solution that is the best. It provides the students with the skills to be able to evaluate media reports and understand what's in the media and be able to decide. So it's science about citizenship as well. It changes the lessons, the science lessons, from memorization to understanding. And it creates positive attitudes towards science and learning. So we have the three basic cores that should be part of science education: knowledge, processes and scientific practices, and also introducing the social aspects of doing science. My work is not unique in science education. There are a number of people that are doing similar kind of projects, either in Europe, in the US, in Australia, across the world. Profiles is an EU-funded project, a 7th framework project. And Profiles is not specific for argumentation, but it's about inquiry. But if you go on their websites, you can also find examples of lessons about argumentation. Another example is the Ideas project, that is a project by King's College London. That was my previous affiliation, my previous work. And the group at King's College London was probably the best one that started doing work in the area of argumentation. And in the Ideas pack, they tried to design lessons that would help the teachers teach argumentation within the actual curriculum. So they didn't change the curriculum. They didn't provide a different curriculum. They just changed the activities. So you will see that the examples that they have do not provide the social aspect as the ones that I presented before, but are examples from what is actually happening in the science curriculum. And this is another example in which they have two different graphs, and the students have to discuss why we have these two different graphs, and they have the different kind of data that they can match on their argument to decide about their argument. Another kind of example is supporting students in science thinking and writing, justifying claims with evidence and reasoning. This is a US-based project. And again, here you can find examples from lessons that were developed by teachers to teach argumentation In the US, they have a different terminology for argumentation. They use the term evidence-based explanations instead of argumentation. And this is an example of a book that was a compilation of chapters about research that was done in argumentation, either from the perspectives of teachers or students, learning environments, and so on. And you can see that one of the co-editors of the book is Spanish, is Maria Pilar Jiménez Alexander from the University of Santiago de Compostela. So there are a number of different Spanish groups doing work in argumentation as well. So the challenges in argumentation, I'm going to be honest, trying to change the practice, and Sarah talked about changing the practice before, so trying to change the practice is not easy. So from the perspective of the students, the challenges that we face is that, as I've said before, the students are uncertain about the uncertainty. Our students are used to having science presented in a final form. So they want their teacher to tell them that this is the solution, this is the knowledge, this is what you have to know. So they're not certain about this kind of change. Argumentation is also not part of what is tested in science. In science tests, in science exams, we test knowledge. We don't test skills. So in order to convince students and teachers to change their practice, to change what they're doing, we need to test more than the content. But the question there is, how do we test skills in a test? From the perspective of the teachers, again, they're not certain about the uncertainty. They want to provide an answer to their students so that they don't feel comfortable doing what the teachers, in my case, did. Additionally, most of the students are not familiar with scientific practices and the model of doing science because most of the teachers do not have an actual science background. Doing what my teachers did takes, of course, more time. It takes more time to prepare, and it takes more time to implement the learning in the classroom. You saw that it took 14 lessons for the second one to implement. And the reason that we had the time is because we worked with a primary school teacher, and primary school teachers usually have more time to change their curriculum. And as I said earlier, they're not sure how and what to evaluate if they teach in that way. Then the challenges for the researchers and science education, we're not sure on how to support students and teachers. We have many questions yet to answer. And of course, we're not sure on how to influence policies, and that's a big thing for the research education community. What I have here is a quote from an interview with a high school teacher, because another aspect of my work is working with teachers as well to see how they implement these practices. And as part of a project I'm doing on exploring teachers' views of teaching science and their actual teaching practices. So basically I see what they think that they're doing and what they're actually doing in practice. I observed a teacher, and this teacher was teaching photosynthesis. And in her lesson, she was presenting cases from the history of science. So she was presenting experiments that the scientists did to discover aspects of photosynthesis, and she was asking her students to be critical about the experiments. So this is the experiment. What do you think their hypothesis was? Why do you think they set up the experiment like this? What do you think we gained from this experiment? And what would you change? So after observing the lesson, I interviewed the teacher, and I asked her about if she thinks that there should be things about scientists in the books. And she said, it is not necessary. I think it's not necessary to teach them these details. I think what is necessary is to provide them with details that will help them. In the case of my lesson, for example, it was very important to help them understand how knowledge was developed, because the way we usually think and the way the students usually think is very similar to that way, to the way that Aristotle was thinking 2,000 years ago. And later on, it developed the way that the scientists develop their knowledge. And before doing nature of science courses and psychology of learning courses for my master's, I did not realize how important this is, but it is very important. And I do believe that what this teacher said in her interview is what all teachers should be thinking about, that we need to help our students go through the processes that the scientists went to discover knowledge and to develop theories. So what should the challenges and future directions be in this area? One of the limitations in my work is that I didn't work with scientists. So I think that one of the challenges is working with scientists to understand how science actually works. So incorporating in the teaching visits to science labs, having authentic experiences, introducing problems and aspects of how scientists work, doing visits to science museums and science centers, but during those visits, actually talking about the story behind the discoveries, so going through the whole processes, working with scientists on projects, which is what you're doing here, and sharing real data, and also having families visit the science centers and doing actual work there. We also need to help our students appreciate science in their everyday lives and start evaluating science in a critical manner. We as science educators need to start educating the educators about the processes that take place in science. And we also need to bridge the gap between scientists and science educators. So bringing your group with the group of people that I work with closer together and interact. There are a number of projects that have been trying to put students and scientists to work together. One example is COVIS. This is an American, a US-based project, and this is a bit old. And in this project, they provided access to a database with climate change data to the students, and the students could work with those data to hypothesize and theorize about the data. Another similar project is the one called Kids as Global Scientists. And again, in this project, scientists collected data about weather in different areas of the world, in different countries in the world, and they shared this evidence, this data, with students, and the students could go back to them and ask them questions about their data. And of course, from what I understood in the morning, from the little bit Spanish that I could understand, you have a lot of projects in Enciende that is doing quite similar things as well. Additionally, we have a project at my university. My university is the coordinator of this project, and we collaborate with other universities as well. We work with Digna on this one, and the project is about preparing science educators for everyday science. We don't work with scientists on this one, but we do try to think about the socio-scientific aspects of science and start to prepare the educators around the scientific practices. So, what should you start considering when either students visit you to your labs or when you go into schools to talk to the students and as scientists? Well, you have to start, I think that you have to start organizing activities that will promote the scientific practice of argumentation and activities that will present those complexities of doing science. So, for example, you could set a problem for the students to explore. You could provide evidence and allow them to set up an experiment and collect data and play around that. Ask them to discuss their findings in their groups and to think about how certain they are about the experimental process they set up, how certain they are about the validity of their data, how certain they are about their findings. So start thinking, start reasoning, and discuss the issues that are linked to science work, and allow them time to discuss and reflect. So the message that I want to send here is that they should know about the kind of difficulties you face as scientists. They should know about the complexities of your work. They should know about the dirty things that you're doing in the science lab. So concluding, scientific practices can help students appreciate the complexities of science. Argumentation is a scientific practice that should become part of the curriculum. Students and teachers need to experience argumentation in authentic settings. Scientists can support our efforts as science educators by providing opportunities to students to experience science as it happens. And I have this graph here that I really like because it shows the complexity of learning. And what you see here in this graph, you see the percentage of time that is devoted for school learning as opposed to the time that is devoted for learning overall. And you can see that only 18.5% of learning happens in school. The rest happens outside of the school. And this is important because it shows that your role as scientists or as people working in museums, science centers, is important in the learning process and maybe more important than our role as science educators in the classroom. And I will finish with this quote that I really like, is that being a scientist, and I lost it, I'm going to bring it back. So being a scientist requires having faith in uncertainty, finding pleasure in mystery, and learning to cultivate doubt. There is no sure way to screw up an experiment than to be certain of its outcome. So it's okay to be uncertain, and that's the message that we need to get through to our students. Thank you.
Bueno, pues thank you, María. Muchas gracias por tu charla. Vamos a tener la oportunidad, creo que tenemos una media hora más o menos, antes de que se den los premios a los proyectos ENCIENDE, para discutir todas estas cosas que hemos hablado durante la mañana y sobre el proyecto en general. Así que os cedemos ahora la palabra y todos aquellos que queréis hacer alguna pregunta, o bien a las ponentes, o bien al presidente de ENCIENDE o a mí misma como secretaria ejecutiva, pues podéis vehicularla ahora. No sé quién... tienes el micrófono, perfecto. Sí.
Thank you. My name is Adolfo Quiroz. I am a mathematician, so probably I'm not a scientist in the sense that you have been talking about today. But still, I'm very interested in these issues. I asked this from Sarah already, so I want to ask it from Maria. You in fact, explicitly said that your method, I mean, all these methods, all these hands-on methods, require a lot more time. Therefore, they are, in a sense, inefficient. I say in a sense because I am convinced that we should teach less so that our students learn more. But this is very hard to sell. It's a very hard sell for parents and for politicians. We are in a society that values results above all, that worries about PISA and teams, not because of what they show, but as a way to compare Spanish children with Finnish children. So how do you convince politicians and parents that their children are going to be better equipped for life? Because we are talking about primary school students. This is not future. I mean, this is the waiter we find outside. I mean, this is everybody. How do you convince them that they are going to be better equipped for life if they learn to do science or how science works rather than learning a lot of contents?
Yeah, Thanks for the question. I wish I knew the answer to that. It's not easy. I'm not worried about parents that much because parents are easier to convince. I'm mostly worrying about policymakers. And one of the challenges that we face in science education is that it's not easy to convince policymakers to make changes because they are counting numbers and they care about PISA, they care about teams, and they don't really care about the actual learning that happens in the classroom. As I've said, I'm not sure because if I was sure, I was going to be able to change that in my country. But maybe one way to do it is to use the outcomes from PISA and teams, because in my country, Cyprus, and in Spain as well, we don't have good outcomes. So if we convince them that there needs to be a change based on the outcomes, we can change from having a lot of content to having less and more meaningful. In Cyprus, for example, we changed the curriculum last year, and fortunately, in this curriculum, we didn't minimize the content, but we were fortunate enough to have people that can understand that scientific practices are important, so we have incorporated these kind of changes. I hope that in 10 years or so, we will be able to make more changes because changes need time. And something else that I wanted to add on this point is that even if we change the policy, even if we are able to change the curriculum, it doesn't necessarily mean that we change the practice, we change what the teachers are doing in the class. We need time, and if we understand that we need time and we take smaller steps, probably we can achieve it.
Just a small comment on the question, which is a very important question because that's where the money are. There's a paradox in the way that we discuss science teaching, is because on the one hand we want to stick to curriculum and to the curricula and teach the content, and on the other hand we hope to see the pupils do investigations on their own and pose questions and find answers for themselves. So there's this paradox in trying to make the pupils little scientists, and that's lying, because the children cannot find out for themselves only within an order of magnitude. So in my sense, we need to teach what you call practices in a dogmatic way, as the set of rules that we play by in science in order to make the children independent. So in that way, I'm going all the way back to Immanuel Kant, saying that we need to make the children independent by influencing them quite heavily, but always with the aim of making them independent. It doesn't. This does not answer the question on how to make it understandable for the policymakers, but for the teachers, we try to make it possible for them to teach the practices in a sort of dogmatic way. You need to know this, and then hopefully you will be more competent and a better citizen and a better person.
Well, I also, Paloma Fernandez from Universidad Complutense. Also in this sense, I would like to comment that probably part of the problem is also the concept we have at the universities, because probably if we change also our scope in the university to not to teach so many concepts, not to teach so many contents, probably our students, when they go to the school, when they go to teach to the younger people, are also able to defocus a little bit, not to concentrate so much on the contents, but on attitudes. But normally, at least here in Spain, the universities, we're always thinking on curriculum and all the things that we must be taught at the university. And I think it's very difficult that afterwards, when our students go to the school, because of course some of them are going to be teachers afterwards, I think it's quite difficult that they realize that all the long time they have spent at the university, it was not wrong, but probably they must change quite a lot, because we are demanding a quite different thing. And so normally we're always talking about what to be done in the school, and also about the policymakers or politicians, but we are not thinking on our role as university teachers, as professors. And I think it should be also quite important to focus a little bit on how we are doing at universities to prepare our students not only to be scientists, but also to be teachers or just normal persons working in many other works. Okay?
Thank you. I'm Ana Garcia Serrano. I'm coming from computer science in the UNED, the Open University in Spain. And my question is related to a nice schema that Sarah showed us about which is the process in which the hypothesis starts and the cycle, and then you focus mainly on the kind of techniques or ways we have to in order to promote the cycle. But we were discussing at the coffee time that how to, for me it's very important to have some concepts and some contents in order to know which is wrong or which is not like this. And one thing that I would like to know from you is how to promote the development of the creation of the hypothesis. Because, for example, in the samples of the argumentations project, I like it very much from you, Maria. See always, or in your examples, you started with something, no? The animals and what do you think in order to go into the argumentation. But when there is not, how to promote the hypothesis creation?
Oh, extremely relevant question. And I didn't have time to elaborate on it, because what is a problem about this circle, as you pointed out quite clearly, is that it's more of a narrative we live by, that a scientist will wake up one morning and have a question and then go explore and come back with the answer, and then the circle is full, because of course the circle is done several times. And what we suggest is that the teacher take responsibility in teaching and promoting and illustrating all the aspects in the circle. And this entails that the teacher will not always have to start in the question. The process can start in deciding to choose a subject area, say the life in the woods, and then choosing a method of investigation. And then the chosen method of investigation and the subject area will help deciding what kind of questions can we pose here and what kind of hypothesis is possible to make. So you don't throw the pupils out in the deep waters by asking them well, what do you think? Well, I don't think anything because I do not know anything about life in the woods. So you need to scaffold that what you are doing right now, that's actually a hypothesis. Did you know that? No. Ooh, wow, I made a hypothesis. So you need to work on it and take responsibility in breaking it down into smaller bits. But when I present it, I'm aware it sounds awfully simple and awfully easy. It's not, I know.
Let me add something until you get the microphone. In the curriculum, in the new curriculum in Cyprus, we're using a similar kind of cycle to teach science. And what we're trying to convince the teachers to do is to try to think of how the problem that they're going to study relates to their everyday life. So when I teach teachers, I'm a teacher educator. So what I'm trying to tell them every time they want to present a lesson plan is try to think, so what? So for example, if you're going to teach magnets to your students, try to think, so what? Why do I teach them? Is this going to benefit them? So if they start from the so what question, maybe they can start thinking about hypotheses as well and the connections to their life. And then the cycle is going to make more sense for them.
I have a good example from Norway with a class asking an everyday question, why is the pattern on the pancake different on the one side and the other? And they started trial and error. Let's see how many different kinds of pancakes we can make. And then the ideas of connections between heat and butter and flip radius. And so suddenly they had made a very nice theory about pancakes. Quite beautiful.
The previous question, if I can add something. I think one of the problems of this project-based learning and introducing scientific practices and new methodologies is that for some people this is added to the old curriculum. So to speak, you teach whatever, you teach nutrition, and then you do an experiment or a project on shall we eat insects, as the ONU is recommending us. The idea is, then this is even worse because it's all the contents plus all the processes plus all everything, and everything is even more stuck, and then the student gets absolutely crazy. The message is to teach about nutrition doing this. So not teaching first and then doing it, but teaching about nutrition in the problem, in the context of the problem and solving a solution, in the context of deciding, shall we eat insects, in which things we have to think to decide that. On taste, on culture, but also what are insects made of? What are the components? Are these components necessary for me? Then I start to learn about nutrition and diet and so on because I need it to solve the problem, but not before solving the problem. I think one of the fundamental things we have to change our mind is that we learn in the activity, not for the activity. Not before the activity, not after the activity, in the activity. This is how we learn in our professional lives. We learn to be a physicist, being a physicist. And our students learn mathematics, doing mathematics, in the activity of doing mathematics. And they learn biology by doing biology. And if we don't agree with this fundamental principle of learning, it's very difficult that we reduce the contents and we focus on the important things.
Mi nombre es Jesús Álvarez, perdonadme que haga la pregunta en español. Soy investigador en el área de física y todo lo que me estáis contando, que yo no tengo experiencia como divulgador o experiencia en la enseñanza, para mí es de vital importancia porque de alguna manera vivo de ello y de primera mano sufro la calidad de los investigadores jóvenes con los que empiezo a trabajar y también cómo la sociedad ve a los investigadores alrededor de nosotros, o sea que es muy importante. Agradezco especialmente las dos charlas que habéis dado porque me han enseñado unas cuantas cosas que espero poder aplicar en mi entorno. Y mi pregunta directa para vosotras dos es, aparte del valor o del papel que juegan los políticos, ¿no?, a la hora de implementar estas cosas que nos estáis enseñando, es qué ayuda, qué apoyo, qué relación tenéis con los medios de comunicación, cómo los medios de comunicación pueden ser una mano extra más para enseñar no solo a los profesores, a los maestros, ¿no?, o a los alumnos, sino a toda la sociedad en general.
Well, a short answer for that will be how I now represent a different area within science communication since I now work at an aquarium, and there I see possibilities to have influence on how zoos and aquarium is viewed by the public, and especially by the zoos themselves, because there's a transformation in how collections of animals is viewed, and the collection is no longer of value in itself. It's first when the collection is experienced by the public, it becomes interesting, and where I see a short answer. I said, I'm babbling on, sorry. No, what I see is that we as an informal learning institution, we should address this as well, how what knowledge can be drawn from the visitors' first-hand experience, so what they encounter visiting with the family. If we can frame that in a scientific way, we are on a way of making it to everyday learning. I'm not sure, I'm not quite clear about this, but I have never thought about it before you asked. Sorry if it didn't make sense.
From my perspective, the only times that we really address the media in my research group is when we send out reports to the media about the projects that we've done, but not in a scientific way, in a more popular science way. So, for example, the project that we did with the mosquitoes, we asked the students to write about it and write their emotions, and we sent that to a newspaper. But no, we don't have any other contact with the media. But I'm not sure if the media can play a role in changing the policies, because the policies in education come from the ministries. And I think the people that we want to try to influence are the people that work in the ministries, and we need to lobby for that. So, for example, what we have been doing for a year and a half in Cyprus, we set up a group of science teachers, and we call it scientific community, scientific literacy community. And it's a group of people from elementary schools, secondary schools, and some academic people as well. And we have been trying to lobby for changes in the curriculum. So we asked to meet the minister, and we talked to him about it. We asked to meet some people that work for the government and explain the kind of changes that we want to do. We have meetings like the ones that we have today, and we invite them to come and listen to what we have to say. And it's a slow process, but I think that by informing them of the different kind of things that we are doing, maybe we can at some point convince them, hopefully.
Now I have time to think. What they do at the experimentarium is that they have hired a group of journalists to make another kind of science journalism, because normally science journalism will be the new cure for cancer is found, and then the next day, well, it wasn't the complete cure anyway. But they angle the story so hard that there's no doubt, there's no uncertainty left. And the experimentarium, being an informal learning environment, they have set a goal that they should provide the media, science.dk, for instance, with with stories that may draw from the same sources as the others, but the headlines will be different. It will contain more of the ways they have worked, and for instance, that they work in, that it's not one scientist finding the answer, it's a community of scientists finding answers, because they are discussing, they're sharing. So they're trying just small steps to change the way to communicate about science.
Espero que me disculpéis por volver a intervenir, pero ahora lo hago en castellano porque es con otro gorro. Ahora voy a hablar, hacer una reflexión como miembro, de hecho, vicepresidente de una de las sociedades miembros de COSTE, de la Real Sociedad de Matemática Española, con respecto al proyecto. Aparte de decir que he dicho que quizá no era científico y me acabo de dar cuenta de que en el logo de Enciende lo que salen son fórmulas matemáticas, luego sí soy científico. Se han planteado, de hecho, en las charlas dos problemas con la ciencia. Uno es el de, lo ha dicho me parece María, explícitamente la escasez de vocaciones científicas en Europa en particular, y el otro es el de llevar la ciencia al conjunto de la sociedad. El proyecto sé que se dedica sobre todo a lo segundo, pero quizá desde el punto de vista de la participación de los científicos, lo que habéis dicho al principio de que no acaba de funcionar lo de llevar científicos a las escuelas, quizá es importante que las sociedades, y el proyecto ENCIENDE en particular, nos intente convencer a los científicos de que nuestra participación en este proyecto no tiene que ser solo ni fundamentalmente para conseguir futuros científicos, sino que se trata de llevar la ciencia al conjunto de la sociedad. Y como he dicho ya antes, me lo ha recordado lo que ha dicho la colega de la Complutense, de que a veces enseñamos muy mal. El proyecto es para primaria sobre todo, y a ese nivel es enseñanza absolutamente obligatoria, está todo el mundo, y ese debe ser nuestro objetivo. Y creo que no es fácil convencernos a los científicos de que debemos hacer de que es nuestra obligación hacer eso, aunque no reporte ningún beneficio profesional, ni inmediato, ni seguramente directo a largo plazo.
Bueno, yo casi uniendo las dos contribuciones, ¿no? Lo que decía, por ejemplo, María, de lo importante que es la idea de lobby de presión. Yo creo que Enciende ahí tiene un papel, o la COSTE tiene un papel, en el sentido de que lo que tú has dicho al final es especialmente importante. Que a los científicos no les cuente para nada el esfuerzo de transferencia y de divulgación es uno de los problemas que hace que en un momento en el que todo el mundo está estresado y presionado, etcétera, esto solo lo haga la gente que está muy comprometida y que considera que realmente quiere hacerlo, pero no considera que lo tiene que hacer, y a veces ni siquiera sus colegas entienden que lo tiene que hacer o respetan que lo haga. Con lo cual, una de las primeras cosas que desde COSTE se puede intentar hacer es presionar para que esto se empiece a reconocer. Esta es una de las primeras cosas. Por otro lado, yo estoy totalmente de acuerdo con lo que dices. O sea, la idea del proyecto es vehicular, aglutinar todas esas iniciativas que algunas ya se están haciendo y promover que se hagan otras nuevas para acercar la ciencia a la sociedad. No desde el punto de vista de la empleabilidad o de tener futuros científicos, porque al paso que vamos en España más bien nos sobran, ¿vale? Nos sobran a expuertas, porque parece que no tenemos muchas ganas ni maneras de emplearlos. Aquí está siendo un poco cínica, obviamente, pero bueno. Pero sí es cierto que a quien no le sobra, seguro, cultura científica es a la sociedad. Y la ciencia solo se va a poder mantener, emerger, florecer, si la sociedad que la financia, que la respalda, etcétera, la entiende y la respeta. Y esto solo vamos a conseguir si todo el mundo sabe un poquito más de ciencias. O sea, no es simplemente para conseguir más y mejores científicos. Para esto hay otras maneras de hacerlo. Yo siempre digo que si el objetivo es tener científicos, hay países que lo hacen de otra manera. Los compran, se los traen de otro sitio y ya está. ¿Vale? Nosotros no queremos eso. Nosotros queremos que gente de aquí sea científica y que la mayoría de la gente tenga cultura científica. Es otra cosa. Y esto sí requiere una involucración por parte de todos, que estaría muy bien que estuviera reconocida, porque aunque tiene un glamour especial y un romanticismo, las acciones totalmente altruistas, todos sabemos que eso no se sostiene y no genera estructura. Necesitamos que se entienda que es tan importante la comunicación de los resultados científicos como su transferencia a la sociedad y la divulgación. Y retomando con lo que decía el compañero, aquí los medios de comunicación tenemos un papel, pero la verdad es que nos entendemos mal. Yo creo que los científicos y los medios de comunicación nos entendemos mal. Y nos entendemos mal por diversos motivos. Y uno de ellos es porque los medios de comunicación quieren una historia, y una historia de impacto. Y los científicos solemos ser muy aburridos contando historias. Entonces, al contar la realidad, la ciencia es mucho más del día a día, de ir haciendo, de probar y no sale, de grandes colaboraciones, ellos quieren un héroe o una heroína, etc. Tenemos también que conseguir que más científicos sean periodistas científicos, porque mientras los periodistas científicos sean periodistas, y no científicos periodistas, esto es difícil que cambie.
My name is Luis Cuesta from Centro Astrobiología. Sarah said that the number of teachers dedicated to materials related with science is about 30%. Well, I think it's too low, and I don't know, but I'm sure that in Spain it's lower, and now probably most of them recycling to religion. What do you think is the best balance?
Well, that's the thing about numbers, because when I point out that it's only 30% has got formal education, it's to say that the rest, they stink, but they don't. They can be very good teachers, even though they have no formal education within science, because they can draw on other subjects. But I would suggest that the number should be much higher. But I agree with your concluding slide that it's not. It's difficult, because at some point I would say that it's your approach to science, your sense of humiliation. Can you say that you cannot that you know that you cannot provide all the answers, and the body of knowledge that we teach is. It changes, and what we choose to teach is it's not fixed. What is important to learn? You always need to have this pedagogical discussion. What is the right thing to teach? How can we decide what is important for the next generation? And we need to decide what is important for the next generation. And if you're good at that, then the scientific content knowledge may not be of such great importance. But if you're not good at that, then at least you should have some scientific content knowledge. And then the other way around, if you have huge scientific content knowledge, I have seen teachers with very highly skilled teachers within biology, and they did fantastic inquiry-based science education, because they could let the children pose questions, and they were always ahead of the children within the content, so they know how to provoke the children, how to point out something that if you just take a look to the right, you will see something that maybe will change your mind, because they were always in the known what the pupils could experience. But if you have no content knowledge and you take a walk in the woods, you're on the same level as the pupils, and then you cannot scaffold the experience. And then so for me it's impossible to answer, but an awareness of what you're lacking and how you can compensate for your lack of competences. I don't know if that answered the question, but it was a view on it.
In Spain, that you were asking, the figure is not that it's low, but because we don't have such a thing as a scientific specialization in primary school. This doesn't exist. Our primary school teachers are generalist teachers, and they receive general training among other subjects, they also received scientific training. But one of the things that the Informe Enciende pointed out in 2011 was how reduced is this initial training in science. I made a little bit of research in different universities, and in general it's less than 5% of the total number of teaching hours that a primary school teacher, a future primary school teacher, receives of science. Not really scientific content, but how to teach science, which is what they really need, how to teach science. So this is really complicated because, and we have some primary school teachers in the audience, and perhaps they can tell. But in general, primary school teachers feel disempowered to teach science. They realize they don't know enough, and they feel frustrated because they would like to do differently, because they have very nice ideas about how teaching should be and how learning should be, and they don't know how to get that in science because they don't have the content. So that's really problematic. One of the things you can do, of course, is increase this initial training in the basic subjects. But also another thing is to collaborate with the teachers from scientists, from science education researchers, and so on. Because in general, they have a very good idea of what is good teaching. The only thing is that they don't have enough scientific knowledge of how to get that in science.
Some of the teachers that I have had on my courses that were the most enthusiastic were actually language teachers that were forced. What they told me, they were forced to teach science. And when they have been at the courses that I made, they said to me, all right, now I know the genres, now I know the framework, now I know the didactics of science, so now I can recognize the framework I use in Danish. When teaching Danish, when I have a framework, now I have a framework in teaching science. So they were very skilled language teachers, so they could transfer the pedagogical content knowledge from one subject to another. But they were good teachers, skilled teachers within a different subject. And that was a thrill for me to experience.
The situation in my country with primary school teachers is quite similar with the case in Spain. We have, I teach primary school teachers, so they have negative attitudes towards science. I teach the introductory course, and every time I ask them to describe a positive and a negative experience about science, and they have thousands of negative experiences to share with me, but no positive experiences. So, yeah, so if we start from this, if you have negative experiences about science because you failed science, that's why you have negative experiences, then you don't want to teach it. And we have, at my university, they have to take 3 courses in science that are about content, and then they take one that is about science methods, how to teach the science. And we do have a specialization, and if we have 10 teachers per year that specialize in science education, we are very happy with it. So, yeah, not a lot of teachers want to teach science, but at least those that choose to do it are very enthusiastic about it, and they have positive outcomes in the schools.
Hola, buenos días. Soy de la Universidad de Valladolid y soy formador de maestros, de futuros maestros. Entonces, una reflexión y una pregunta. Una pregunta es para Sara, ¿cómo consigue enganchar o convencer a los maestros en ejercicio para que participen en el proyecto? Y luego la otra reflexión es que nosotros encontramos un obstáculo que es el obstáculo conceptual. O sea, incidimos mucho en los procesos de la ciencia, pero encontramos que les faltan conceptos, contenidos. Entonces también tenemos 2 asignaturas, una de cosas, de contenidos, y otra de didáctica, igual que la Universidad de María. Entonces lo que tenemos es que los alumnos no tienen conocimientos mínimos para que puedan entender correctamente y argumentar todo lo que le estamos enseñando. Entonces, luego eso, la transposición a las aulas es negativa y nada más.
Let's see if I understood it right. Because the course that we were offering was not a part of the formal teacher education, we could take the liberty of being quite direct in how we see things. And so we could say, when we look at you as teachers, this is what we see and this is what we think you should do differently. And one of the things we pointed out is you should not put up activity goals, you should set up learning goals. Because the Danish teachers, they formulate activity objectives or activity goals. In this lesson, the children will try and manipulate a cube of ice and see how it melts. And if the teacher then see in the class that the pupils are indeed playing with the cubes of ice and the ice is melting, then cha-ching, we have accomplished our activity goal. But what was the learning objective? And that's the difference between setting up something that is playful and it's fun, it's a competition, and all the motivation is there. But if the evaluation is solely on what was done and not what was said and what was the reflection, what kind of answers or what kind of questions can you pose after the activity? So it's a very important issue you're raising, if I understood you right, I hope.
¿Tú quieres saber cómo involucran a los profesores en formación continuada?
Si van a los colegios.
The teachers who participate in Method Lab, how they enroll in doing this training?
Thank you, Digna. How they were enrolled. Yes, now I understand. I hope the other thing I said was interesting as well. What we did was we targeted the principals at different schools. We simply had a task force pointing out different schools in areas in the whole of Denmark, and then through contact directly with the principal at the school and offering them a free course for the teachers, science teachers. And Experimentarium is a quite strong brand in Denmark, so it was definitely a selling point that it was Experimentarium, because then they know, ooh, it's going to be fun. And then it was always also tough. So it was done directly to the schools.
Si puedo, porque hago lo mismo que yo también soy formadora de maestros de primaria en la Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona, y sí que tenemos también problemas de contenido, pero esto lo único que nos dice es realmente el reto que tenemos en la enseñanza primaria y secundaria. Porque estos alumnos sí han hecho 16 años, más o menos, bueno, a veces 14, a veces de ciencias, supuestas ciencias. Y cuando llegan a la universidad vemos que ideas muy fundamentales no las han trabajado y sí que tienen a veces, recuerdan un peso de detalles brutal. O sea, son capaces de recordar que alguna vez se aprendieron todos los huesos del cuerpo, pero nunca nadie les hizo pensar para qué sirve tener un esqueleto. Y qué otras maneras de sostenerse, de estar en el mundo hay, que puedes encontrar en la naturaleza. Yo creo que esto que nos está diciendo es lo que venimos comentando todo el rato. No es importante la cantidad de contenidos, es importante aprender los contenidos fundamentales. Y afortunadamente en Didáctica de las Ciencias ya hay 2 o 3 publicaciones que van en esta línea, reports internacionales que van en la idea de las 10 ideas fundamentales de la ciencia, que son esas 10 ideas las que hay que trabajar. Y que tenemos eso, 10, 12 años para trabajar 10 ideas. Si nos concentramos en eso, lo conseguimos seguro. El problema es que no nos concentramos en las ideas importantes. Aprendemos muchísimos nombres, muchísimos conocimiento rutinario. Los libros de texto no ayudan, son tremendamente pesados. Yo cuando, no sé vosotros, pero cuando es los libros de texto de los niños, ¿no? Y cómo van cargados a la escuela, es horroroso cómo a los profesores y a los maestros no se les facilita un material más razonable. Porque si alguien cree que realmente tiene que enseñar eso, es verdad que tiene que correr. pero correr y correr solo. Nadie le va a seguir, pero correr solo. Entonces, yo creo que, en general, la estructura está pensada para ir añadiendo conceptos y no está pensada para hacer una reflexión de cuáles son las ideas importantes y solo voy a trabajar esas. Y yo estoy de acuerdo con María. Muchas veces decimos, es que los padres no lo entenderían. Y a priori es cierto que pondrían resistencia, pero yo creo que lo podemos explicar. Yo creo que esto, al final, los padres lo entienden. Lo que pasa es que no lo tenemos que creer entre todos. Que lo importante no son las cabezas bien llenas, sino las cabezas bien amuebladas. Y que para amueblar una cabeza no hacen falta tantas cosas. Hacen falta muchas veces las mismas, el mismo tipo de cosas.
Can I comment on that? It's an extremely interesting thing you're pointing at, because I know that some of my colleagues at the experimentarium, they're working very much on innovation right now. And there's a dogma in Denmark saying that innovation is done by doing it. And in some, and that's true, but in some parts of Denmark, the schools have joined forces with the local factories or manufacturers, and attempting to make the pupils solve real problems in real life. And there's a huge discussion going on about that, because is that cheating? That, of course, the children can have some brilliant ideas, but they lack a certain knowledge. So there are two directions in Denmark regarding innovation. One saying you should simply do it and stop teaching knowledge that is not being used right away. And the other one saying, well, true innovation stems from huge amount of knowledge already established. So where to go? Yeah. Yeah.
Estando como estamos todos de acuerdo en que hay que mejorar la calidad de la enseñanza de la ciencia, estoy interesado en saber cuál es vuestra experiencia a la hora de transmitirla. ¿Qué dificultades os habéis encontrado? Por un lado, con los maestros, por otro lado, con los políticos que hacen la legislación, a la hora de transmitir vuestras ideas y de implementarlas, ¿no? A mí se me ocurre, por ejemplo, por cuestiones de inercia, ¿no? Lo he hecho toda la vida, entonces ahora no lo voy a cambiar. Por cuestiones de recursos, ¿no? Si no hay dinero, pues no se puede, ¿no? Pero también a lo mejor hay veces cuestiones ideológicas, querría saber si las hay, os habéis encontrado eso alguna vez. Y luego, bueno, María ha puntualizado el caso de las malas experiencias, ¿no? Si he tenido malas experiencias con la ciencia, mejor no saber de ellas.
Yeah, I will start with politicians. My experience with politicians, people in the Ministry of Education, we try to talk to them, we try to convince them about changes in the primary school system, teaching science in the primary school. And it's like hitting a brick wall. They don't want to listen and they don't care because they're doing the politics and we are just science educators. And something that we were told, and I think it represents of what they think of science educators, is that they told us we don't really need primary school teachers to specialize in science. They are teaching primary school teachers, so I could even do it. That's what they told us. So you don't need any kind of training to do it. So it's not easy to talk to them, and it's not easy to convince them. Because I don't want to be negative, I'm trying to be very positive. I think that piece by piece, if we could, it might take years, but at some point we will be able to influence policy in some kind of way. On the other hand, with teachers, I think we face similar kind of questions and challenges every time. With elementary school teachers, it's easier to convince them to work with us because they can change the curriculum easier. They don't have exams. So if I tell them that I want to come and spend 2 months in your classroom working with you, they will be okay with that, at least most of them. But if I try to do this with secondary school teachers, the answer that I usually get is that we have exams, so we need to teach for the exams. and they don't like the change because the change that I'm going to propose, it's not going to be tested at the end of the year. The other kind of challenges we face with primary school teachers, of course, is the lack of content knowledge. And we know that it's a similar problem across Europe and I think in all countries, in the US as well. But from my point of view, it's not a problem if the teachers themselves are aware of this. So if they know that they lack the content knowledge, and if we provide them with the ways to be able to find new knowledge and improve their knowledge, then this is going to help them. So for example, what I tell my students is that I don't want you to teach anything unless you're very sure about this kind of knowledge you're going to teach. So go out, go wherever you want, go online, go find a scientist, come to my office and talk to me, and be sure that you know the content before you teach it. So I think working with the challenges that the teachers are facing is much easier than working with policymakers.
What your question made me think about is that I took part in a group of professionals from various parts of the environment, so to speak, from the university in Copenhagen and other places, and we tried to address the problem that in Danish schools science is taught as one subject from 0 to 6th grade, and then in 7th grade it's divided into biology, physics and chemistry. And we tried to pose the idea to the confederations of biology teachers, the confederation of chemistry teachers, why not make a joint science subject in the higher grades as well, as a way of simply discussing what is the right content in a science subject in school in general. And the opposition was massive. Ni hablar. Nada. Nunca. And we tried, and we could, over a beer or a glass of wine, we could make them admit that it's completely a coincidence that it's these three. Why not biotechnology? Why not nanotechnology? Why not astronomy? Why these three subjects? But now they are embedded in a rock, so it cannot be changed. But I think that would be a way in, a sort of bottom up. Now we are trying to change the subject, and then we'll have a discussion with the decision makers. Then what should the curriculum for this new subject be? And then we can make this canon of the most significant problems.
Aquí, bueno, ya lo sabéis que es exactamente igual. Yo creo que este es uno de los problemas que tenemos, la contradicción, el enorme gap y la enorme diferencia que tenemos entre la escuela primaria y secundaria. Y que de hecho es una de las cosas que más contribuye a la desigualdad entre escuelas públicas y concertadas o privadas. Porque en estas otras escuelas esa transición es mucho más smooth, es mucho más suave. Generalmente son escuelas que continúan de la primaria a la secundaria y por lo tanto ya se encargan de que esa transición sea más paulatina. Nosotros tenemos una fractura total. O sea, son dos escuelas que tienen dos racionales totalmente diferentes, dos maneras de hacer, dos objetivos, dos filosofías y dos profesionales formados de manera totalmente diferente. Unos muy bien en educación y menos en contenidos, los otros básicamente en contenidos. Ahora con el máster se está intentando paliar un poco esta situación, pero lo que tenemos en las escuelas de secundaria hoy en día son expertos en contenidos, gente que ha sido física, química, etcétera, que en el mejor de los casos se ha ido formando o a través de su experiencia ha aprendido y por lo tanto ahora son buenos profesores, pero que en algunos casos son personas sobre todo preocupadas por la transmisión de ese contenido que es su vida, porque es lo que él es como él se representa. Esto, claro, los niños entre una cultura y la otra han pasado 2 meses de verano, nada más. Entonces, es imposible adaptarse. Nosotros tenemos estudios hechos en el periodo de transición, es decir, entre el último trimestre de primaria y el primer trimestre de secundaria, y es alucinante los comentarios de los chicos. O sea, te dicen cosas y te rompe el corazón, te dicen cosas como he perdido mi referente, ¿dónde está mi maestra? Yo sabía cómo se tenían que hacer las cosas. Ahora, cada persona que viene a clase lo hace de una manera diferente. A uno no le importa si escribo bien o mal, lo que le importa es que haga bien el examen. El otro es súper de todos los apuntes bien hechos, el otro no da apuntes, uno sigue el libro, el otro no sigue el libro. Tengo 11 profesores diferentes, no sé dónde estoy. O sea, es realmente un contraste cultural muy fuerte. Y tenemos ahí una gran bajada del interés y el inicio del fracaso. Y el fracaso escolar, es decir, no aprobar, no tener éxito, es exactamente lo que lleva a los alumnos a desmotivarse, etc. Los alumnos, en el fondo, cuando nosotros decimos que estos chicos de 14 años no les importa nada, no quieren hacer nada, en realidad, esto es nosotros decimos en Cataluña un posat, no sé cómo se dice en castellano, como una máscara, ¿no? Una imagen que te haces para ocultar lo duro que es con 12, 13, 14 años empezar a ver que hay algo que no sabes hacer, que hay algo que los otros dicen que deberías saber hacer y tú no, y otros de tu lado sí saben. Entonces, el fracaso escolar es una vivencia tremenda para estos chicos y luego, claro, cada uno, la gente no asume tener fracaso en su vida y por lo tanto tiene que tener éxito en otra cosa. Y si esa otra cosa es ser el notas de la clase, ser guaperas o ser el que más puntuación tiene en el juego tal, pues esa es otra cosa, porque en algún sitio tengo que analizar mi necesidad de éxito. Esto es totalmente humano. Yo creo que si consiguiéramos acercar la primaria y la secundaria en filosofía, en maneras de hacer, en entendimiento, si consiguiéramos que los primeros años de secundaria no tuviéramos 14 profesores, tuviéramos 3 o 4, fuera gradual el paso. No es tan difícil que un profesor en primero de ESA pueda dar matemáticas, ciencias, tutoría e informática. No es tan complicado. Se podría hacer, pero como decía Sara, nos encontramos con muchas veces profesores que quieren dar su asignatura, que no se quieren mover. Por otro lado, nada de ayuda y soporte. Los profesores también reaccionan así porque están sometidos a una presión continua de los medios de los malos resultados y la política educativa, que no les ayuda para nada y no facilita nada, sino pone todas las trabas que se pueden poner, etcétera, que realmente la situación es compleja. Y yo preveo que la nueva ley de educación nos va a llevar a un sitio un poco peor todavía, porque al hacer evaluaciones externas, las evaluaciones externas no son necesariamente malas, no tienen por qué ser malas, pero todos sabemos cómo se hacen las cosas en este país, normalmente, y cómo se hacen cuando no hay consenso y cómo se hacen cuando no hay dinero. Y las evaluaciones cuando no hay dinero y no hay consenso son muy malas, porque una buena evaluación cuesta muchísimo. O sea, hacer una pregunta tipo test es muy fácil de proponer y de corregir. Hacer una pregunta competencial es muy difícil de proponer y muy difícil de corregir. Con lo cual, acabarás preguntando unas cosas que no son necesariamente las que tú crees que son importantes, pero son las que puedes evaluar de manera fácil y barata, y eso se acabará convirtiendo en norma y en currículum, porque ¿qué vas a hacer tú? ¿Traicionar a tus estudiantes? Es decir, enseñarles cosas que luego sacan malas notas en la evaluación. Pues lo que harás es, en el mejor de los casos, hacer las dos cosas, o el que ya no lo tenía muy claro, pues así justificará más una práctica negativa y decir, bueno, hago esto porque es lo que me piden. O sea, que yo preveo que vayamos en una dirección contraria. Y ahí nos debemos poner fuertes, porque los cambios educativos luego los sufrimos a muchos años vista. O sea, tienen una influencia muy, muy determinante.
Esta será la última pregunta porque vamos ya mal de tiempo.
Bueno, estamos tratando de cómo llegar la ciencia a los niños, a la gente, pero también estamos tratando de cómo llevar la ciencia a la sociedad en general, por parte de los científicos, los que hacemos ciencia de alguna manera. A mí me gustaría destacar, porque vengo de uno, el papel, y Sara viene de uno, el papel de los museos científicos. Yo creo que los museos científicos son una herramienta fantástica para poder enseñar la ciencia a los niños de una manera divertida, jugando, pero también a los mayores. En la última jornada de puertas abiertas que tuvimos hace un mes en un museo de la ciencia, que es el Parque de la Ciencia de Granada, la jornada de puertas abiertas para una ciudad pequeña entraron 16.450 personas en un solo día, de 10 de la mañana a 7 de la tarde. Y hubo un ambiente científico y hubo cerca de 1.000 personas inscritas de colegios y de la universidad que fueron a exponer su experiencia a la gente, a todos los visitantes. Quiero decir, quizás los científicos, a través de los museos científicos, podamos llegar también de una manera fácil a a la gente menuda y a la gente no tan menuda. Se trata de sacar la ciencia a la calle. Yo hace mucho tiempo me planteé sacar la anatomía a la calle. Y el instrumento para poder hacer eso, con buenos resultados, ha sido a través de un museo científico, en el caso nuestro del Parque de la Ciencia. Con lo cual yo creo que los museos científicos también aquí juegan un papel muy importante. Gracias.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Yesterday I was in Sweden and talked to a PhD student at King's College, and she makes she's investigating on the public. The general public's encounter with scientists at museums. For instance, a natural history museum in London, where they have the Darwin Centre, where the scientists are obligated or obliged to participate in programs. And she had some very interesting findings that she had made the tape recordings of the conversations between the general public, adult people, and the scientists, and go, oh, so you haven't found out everything yet? There. And I mean, if the general public can be surprised by that scientists are still in the dark in many areas, then we have a challenge, and it's a good place to meet them on equal terms. Because if you go to a science center, you go there to have a good time. So you're in a positive mood. So if we can meet them in a respectful way, then I think the impact can be profound towards understanding the nature of science in society, definitely.
Creo que lo dejamos aquí porque tenemos ahora que dar los premios ENCIENDE, tenemos aquí a los premiados, tenemos, como veis, no lo veis vosotros, lo estoy viendo solo yo, ahora lo pondrán. Tenemos además una sorpresita, un vídeo de Ferran Adrià, que nos ha mandado para animar a más escuelas y a más científicos a involucrarse en los premios ENCIENDE, y simplemente damos las gracias a las ponentes. Thank you, María, thank you, Sara. Creo que el reto que les pusimos a dos personas que son formadoras de maestros, comunicadoras de ciencia y expertas en didáctica de las ciencias, de hacer una charla que fuera de interés para maestros y para científicos, que no es fácil, creo que lo habéis conseguido con creces y estamos muy contentos de que estéis aquí. Damos los premios y hacemos la pausa para comer.